Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Data People webinar about how to standardize your way to a better candidate experience. I'm honored to be joined by Jana, and we'll make a short introduction as well. But Jana, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm wonderful, although I'm a little torn because I was hoping to do something this weekend that is not going to occur right now. But that is sometimes the weather works with us, sometimes it works against us. So
So true.
but I'm excited to talk about this really important topic because it doesn't get more important in talent acquisition than candidate experience. And sometimes that is unfortunately the last thing that we have the time or the energy to focus on. And that's
Mm.
really why we all got into this business,
Agreed.
wanted to
Yeah.
engage with great talent. So excited to talk about it. Um, And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? We'd love to hear a bit more about your journey and really this alt life that sounds fantastic.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for talking with me today about this. I agree. Candidate experience is something that is becoming such an important part of what recruiting teams do. And so just by way of introduction, hi, everyone. I'm Jana Biagio. I oversee customer success here at Data People. In a former life, I was one of you. So I was a head of recruiting and people for various startups in the New York scene. I'm now out here in sunny California. So I also hope that weather doesn't impact my weekend plans as well, Brett. But very excited to be speaking with you. I do think in an alternative life, I started my career in fashion. And so I do think in an alternative life, I probably would have a boutique with gifts, clothes, champagne, all the fun stuff.
There's still time. I was talking to one of our customers who is in the Phoenix area, and he ended up opening up, in addition to being a leader of talent acquisition in a very large technology company, he opened up a olive oil shop. So there is still time for you.
I could, well,
Keep chasing that dream.
sure, I will.
Hi, everyone. Brett Van Buskirk. I am honored to connect on this topic. I lead some of our marketing efforts here at Data People. And in a former life, I was on the other side of the fence, if you will, as a hiring manager. So frequently I've built up teams, whether they're marketing teams, entrepreneurship teams, product teams, or even small scale companies inside of some larger companies. And so my opportunity to join Data People was to kind of flip that script on its head, which I'm super excited about. Um, in an alternative life, and really what I aspire to do as quickly as possible in full transparency, although the children make it hard, is just be a traveler. I love traveling the world. I've had a number of really amazing, wonderful experiences. And so trying to pass that on to the children, but also trying to figure out a way to do that as a job. I think I'm probably too old to be an influencer though. So
I'm
we'll
excited to hear. Where are you going next?
we were looking at that. We were thinking San Sebastian, Spain with our children. The problem is they don't eat anything. And so going
Pioneer
to
is out.
going to a country where they will not eat anything but probably bread, and that's maybe it. Makes it difficult. So we'll see. Um, but let's go ahead and jump right on in. And, we're going to start with a little bit of context because I think the context is really important here. What we have seen is the labor markets are still in flux. They're beginning to be more normal, but there is still an extreme amount of either competition and availability of talent, or in the case of the red, a lack thereof in many circumstances that influences the way that talent interacts with companies, influences the way that we interact with talent. This is from 2022 and 2023 data. So it's showing the availability of labor. And remote work, even what are we now? 3 years on from COVID, 4 years on, whatever, three years on from COVID, remote work still continues to dominate candidate attention, and it's receiving the overwhelming majority of applicants. We also know applicant quality sometimes is a little bit lessened with that extreme interest and one-click applications, and that is a separate topic that Data People would love to talk to you all about. But what we know is that remote work and the ability to engage with candidates digitally in a very human-centric way is really important to them. And these sort of confluences, the economy, the availability of labor, the interest in the type of role, whether it's remote, hybrid, or in person that candidates are looking at, has a dramatic impact on candidate experience. And this was a historic benchmark that's been pulled every year or two. And what we're seeing is a pretty precipitous decline here in candidate experience across the board. This isn't just an APAC issue. This isn't just a North America issue. It's everywhere where candidate experience and candidate contentment has notably fallen. And that's something that we want to discuss with you, because that isn't the best way to attract talent. That isn't the best way to build your business. And that certainly is not the best way to introduce yourself to talent pools. And so super excited to get into this here. And talent candidate experience is truly important, and it powers a cycle, either a virtuous cycle or a non-virtuous cycle. A great candidate experience makes your hiring more effective and efficient. It helps build and strengthen your employer brand, which over time continues to make hiring more effective and efficient. A poor candidate experience snowballs in a very negative way. It makes hiring harder, more difficult, longer. It leads to ghosting. And it also leads to less motivated candidates and that deterioration of your employer brand that maybe you've worked so hard to build up. So it's not only important, it's important as a unit of one, but it's important as those units of one accrue because of how they influence future success or frictions. And so we're going to start with, what are 7 simple steps to standardize and transform your hiring process and your candidate experience? So to start with, it always starts with that very first way talent acquisition knows about the potential role opening. Often that is the intake meeting. And what we've seen in our customer base, which is, as you'll hear later in the deck, but we have a customer base that spans 80 countries, multiple different geographic and market areas, with a dramatic diversification of types of businesses. What we've seen from them is they're very clearly emphasizing and investing in the right way to do an intake meeting. And so just as a point of contrast, we'll talk through what sometimes people view as intake meetings. They view them as checkboxes. They view them as something that I need to do, I have to do. Oh, TA tells me to do it, so as a hiring manager, I join it. That's the wrong way to start a process that you hope will deliver a great candidate experience. The right way to do it is to architect a well-designed joint session. Well, both, if not more, parties need to be well prepared. There needs to be documentation that guides the discussion and that the discussion yields as outcomes of it. And as a very discrete outcome of it, there needs to be a concrete agreement on roles and responsibilities. You can't deliver a great candidate experience if your internal team isn't aligned on what to do. So Jana, I'm curious, talk to me about your experiences with intake meetings holistically. Obviously, we'd love to hear about the effective ones, but sometimes the ineffective ones teach us as much, if not more.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm sure our customers get sick of hearing this story, but I do love talking about my time as a head of recruiting and how really, when I used to think about the candidate experience, I used to think about it from the point that I was talking to them, from the point that I moved them from my applicant pool into that first phone screen, into that interview. And I didn't really realize the impact I was having on the type of candidate pool I was creating by the work that I did prior to that moment. So candidate experience, I think, actually starts, as you're pointing out, in this intake meeting, because this is where everything gets established. And I think we've all been there, either as a hiring manager or a recruiter. We've all had those moments where we are showing up to that meeting and we're talking about the skills that we are thinking about. We're talking about the type of job post that we want to write. We need this person hired yesterday. You know, sometimes we are articulate, unicorn candidates that we're looking for, someone with skills, too many skills that might not actually be someone you can find in real life. And so those intake meetings are an incredible moment for a recruiter to really establish that strategic partnership, that advisory position with their hiring manager, to be able to say, hey, let's take a look again at these requirements. Let's really make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success. And so I think there are three things that get really established in this intake meeting and make it effective. One is that you really create that strong partnership with your hiring manager, the role and responsibilities that role will have are well defined. And three, the process and the responsibilities between the two of you as a hiring team get established early on. And we'll talk a little bit more about SLAs, but I think that's really where this meeting can be so instrumental to the types of candidate pools you create.
I love that. I love that. And I heard the magic word that all of us in talent acquisition sometimes feel like we're chasing, sometimes feel like we've attained, which is that strategic partnership. And let's continue thinking about that, because that is instrumental for everything in hiring, especially a great candidate experience.
So I think, along those lines, creating that standardization happens in this part of the process. So we know that rubrics can often set us on the right path. And so let's talk about some standardized rubrics we can create. So the mistake here could be, if we don't have these standardized rubrics, that a hiring team isn't aligned on the core requirements for a role. And candidates are going to be unsure how they're going to be rated in the interview process. So if we're unclear what a role is as we put it out into the world, and that lack of clarity, even in the responsibilities section of the job post, isn't clear, then that translates to how we set it up in the ATS. So there's really a snowball effect of what happens when that clarity isn't created up front. So the right choice here is to have that clarity, to create that criteria that everyone is aligned on as a hiring team. We're all going to have different perspectives as a hiring team as we talk to candidates. So how do we make sure that we all know the set of criteria that we're using to evaluate, and also candidates really feel like they're being evaluated against the skills that a job requires? So really creating standardization here, it goes a long way. So Brett, I would ask you, is there a single rubric across a company, or should it really change by role?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is generally it depends, right? I would say in most cases, I think tailoring the rubric to a similar type of job, whether you call it a job family, a job description, or a job profile, I do believe you can align on something incredibly consistent across multiple similar jobs. That's important as you find and recruit talent for different locations. And it helps you understand over time if you're getting better or worse types of candidates. So I do believe that we should aspire for consistency. Now, that being said, consistency can be across roles, can be challenging. So it's something that needs to be really thoughtfully discussed with that hiring manager. And I go back to what you said earlier, Jana, about some of those conversations with hiring managers about unicorns and like aspirations. This rubric needs to be something that's achievable by the talent that you require to succeed in this role in the future. It shouldn't be a rubric by which to identify that single unicorn candidate. And this needs to be a rubric that you share with the entire hiring team. It needs to be a rubric that they understand and they can articulate. And absolutely, it's a rubric that is, quite frankly, outlined in the job description. Your succinct representation of what's required becomes that rubric. So I love that question. I appreciate you asking it. I wish there were one. Everybody wishes there were one. It isn't quite that simple, but we also shouldn't be we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel, especially when we're hiring similar roles across different job sites, countries, etc. And I know you referenced this earlier, so I'm so excited to hear your story about leading this and some of the abuses that you've taken or you've seen. on the SLA front. But implementing these service level agreements is crucial. We all know that hiring managers and hiring teams want to hire the best talent, but sometimes their actions don't convince us of that. Their actions don't indicate that. And so the mistake that often TA runs into is we're pulled in two different directions. One is we want to get the right talent by a certain time frame. And so we naturally invest and sometimes overinvest in doing heroic things. But that builds and reinforces these one-sided relationships. What is the right choice is that establishment of a symmetric partnership, that partnership that you build and nurture in the intake meeting, that partnership that is solidified when you jointly craft those rubrics by which you evaluate candidates. It's a collaboration with the entire hiring team, not just the hiring manager. And it is that really that shared vision of process execution. What does excellent look like? And how can we over time have that commitment to each other? So I'm dying to hear. You mentioned it earlier. Let's hear, maybe let's start off with your worst SLA abuse, right? Let's hear about that one time or that couple of times where there wasn't that regard for what you thought you had agreed with.
I mean, there's probably too many stories to tell, but I think it comes down to this idea that a service level agreement sounds so much like like putting the recruiter in the support role, right? So you have something that you're being held to as a standard of like, this is the amount of time I said I would get back to you. But I really feel like I've had such a light bulb moment working here at Data People and working with all of our customers, because the SLAs that we're talking about here, it's a two-way street. So it's both the hiring manager and the hiring team has SLAs, and the recruiting TA team has SLAs, and it's both of them together that really establish a really great partnership. Brett, we were just yesterday in our customer advisory board for Data People with all of our incredible customers, and two of them mentioned that they have incredible SLAs, and I hadn't even heard really of this being a common practice, but one had a 48-hour, if we haven't heard back from a hiring manager, we will go ahead and close a role, which I thought was so interesting. There's really this internal culture of hiring managers are very much driving and leading the process, so much so that the process cannot continue without them. Another CAB member, customer advisory board member, jumped in and said, ours is 5 days and we'll pause the role. So I do think that this is becoming much more common practice that teams are establishing from the very beginning in that intake meeting. I think that's where you begin to establish them. You say, this is what my responsibility is as a recruiter. This is what you'll be doing as a hiring manager. And let's agree that this is going to be our turnaround time. And these are the various pieces where we're going to get to each other. So I really do think that this is the way that TA teams get out of being order takers, as you were talking about, and really become those strategic partners. It's really establishing the project plan and the SLAs for the hiring process.
I love that. I am a little blown away that they close a rack after 48 hours. So
I know.
that is extreme. But I think it's indicative to your point of ensuring that everybody has that shared ownership. And the way in which that ownership is represented is by being consistent and aligned with what you outlined at the beginning. So I'm blown away. I don't know if every company can do that. I wouldn't even say necessarily that's best practice, but maybe aspirational for some TA teams.
Well, as a hiring manager, I know I would never let that happen. You're not closing my rec. So I think that would actually be very helpful. Although harsh, I agree. Leveraging job posts. I want to talk, this is, all Data People, we love to talk about our job posts. And I think it all starts with a good template. And this is something that we talk with our customers about at the very, very beginning of them becoming customers. Let's first thing we do. Let's talk about your job post templates and how you think about those as an organization. Because really, when we're thinking about this consistency that we're talking about, when we're thinking about how do we present an employer brand, the candidate experience is all about how do candidates experience your company, not only in the interview process, but even from that very first read of your company. So I'm so excited to talk with you about this. I think templates here, some of the mistakes that get made is that there isn't consistency, especially with large global orgs, and we work with many of them. There are a lot of writers, there are a lot of people writing job posts, there are a lot of voices. It's really hard to create that consistency, especially when everyone is working either from templates that they've saved down on their drive, or they're unable to find the most recent wording coming from the employer branding team. It's really hard to create that consistency. There's also huge compliance risks. As we all know, the diversity statement is something candidates expect on jobs in the US. The EEO statement is actually mandatory, right? There's also many states moving and countries as well looking at putting pay transparency into job posts. So there's huge compliance issues also when you don't create that standardization in your job post templates. So we definitely think that consistency wins here. It's helpful for hiring managers, it's helpful for TA team members to really have a job post template that they're working from. And it really helps, again, create that compliance that a company is, of course, looking for, that your legal team, finance team, everyone is making sure is happening across the board. So, Brett, with your marketing hat on, and I know this is one of our most popular blog posts as well, but I mean, words matter. We really believe that at Data People. So what's the difference between a job description and a job post?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's an important one because companies struggle with this, right? Job descriptions, or even those sort of saved on your drive job posts, they're tempting to use. They're tempting to lift and replace, right? This job description is an internal document that stipulates what I want this role to be. Why can't I just use that in the market? Well, the struggle is, first of all, it is not tailored to a specific market context. Those are often single documents that span across an entire company. They're not supposed to be tailored to a specific role in a specific geography for a specific type of candidate that you're looking to hire. And in fact, in some ways, they should be blind to all of that because they need to be flexible to meet all of those circumstances. The challenge is that flexibility means that they're not very specific. They're not very precise. They're not very engaging. They're a little dry. They're generally legal type of documents. And they don't do a very good job of representing your employer brand, your employer culture, and your promise to the candidate. And because they need to be so flexible, they don't help candidates opt in or opt out. So you get a candidate pool that is unaware and strongly uneducated with regards to what the requirements actually are and whether they fit into those or not. And so besides being boring, besides not really delivering to the market, you're actually harming your recruiting outcomes by not appreciating those core differences, which just boil down to, one is an internal document to structure how you pay people and how you reward, how you measure impact, et cetera, versus the other one that is a marketing document to attract talent for future ways to evaluate them. So it's really internal versus external, and just the same way that you would, maybe dress inside your house versus dress outside your house, you gotta dress to impress with a job post.
Agree completely.
All right, so this one's fun. Being in marketing, I certainly appreciate a degree of automated communications. I also have a strong degree of appreciation for the difficulty in doing them. And so, in a perfect world, we would all create from scratch unique communications for each candidate, each step in the process, each type of communication, each channel. but we don't live in that perfect world. And so consequently, even if we aspire to be incredibly custom and bespoke to our candidates, what happens is that unintentionally, as a consequence of time or situation or context, we might place a degree of bias, or it might be unfair to some candidates. We might over communicate to one candidate and under communicate to another candidate. And that's most of the time strongly unintentional. It's not because we didn't want to communicate well to candidate two. It's because we didn't have enough time in the week, or I had 50,000 other things to respond to.
Mhm.
And so that leads to candidate experiences wildly differing. And as a result, you see some of those reviews on Glassdoor, you see some of those employer brand reviews where they talk about an inconsistent experience. So the right choice is being consistent about how you engage candidates. The right choice is investing a little bit to save yourself and your teams a tremendous amount of time by automation.
Mhm.
And that time savings allows you the opportunity to overinvest. If everybody is here, you can then invest more time in the human experiences. You can then invest more time in later stage candidates. So you can not only give them an email update, but maybe as they're getting close to a work project, you can ensure that you have time to invest in every single one of them to make sure that they have an appreciation of what was required of them and are ready to go. So this one seems like a lot of work. Automation can be work up front. I'm a victim of believing at times it's too easy, and we all are. And so consequently, we're kind of trained to think that automation is hard. It doesn't have to be hard. The best thing we can do is be consistent, and automation and intentional crafting of emails and updates allows us to do that. So what have you seen for our customers, or even when you were a TA lead, what have you seen that has worked well with automation and really makes it easy, right? That perception, how do we tear down that perception that automation is challenging and time consuming?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be built out in the applicant tracking systems themselves. There's a lot of automation between stages that can be put into place. It's something we play with a lot here at Data People as we do hiring. And at each of those stages, you can already preset the email communications that you're going to send out, personalize it as much as possible with those tokens for names, etc. So there's a lot that can be done within the ATS. If you have access to a platform like Data People, we have a communications editor that will also help make sure that your communications, you can run them through Data People, make sure that they are clear, that they're inclusive, market calibrated. So there's a lot that can be done with the communications that you send to applicants. And I would say that from my time as a TA person, one of my favorite things was I brought on a platform that helped me do automated scheduling and communications with my customers with my candidates. And so I was able to really set up those comms in advance, run them through Data People when I was a customer, and really make sure that I was taking some of the heavy lift off of my time and my team's time. And we were able to really focus on those high value conversations. So definitely think it's a combination of doing some early work so that your comms are set up for success, and everything feels very personalized to those candidates.
I love that. Saving yourself time while personalizing the candidate experience. Incredible dual wins there.
Totally. So this is one of my very favorite things that we do in the Data People hiring process. It's something that's been kind of a hallmark of our recruiting since the time that I started here, which was 5 years ago. And so we've always had this idea that we should compensate our candidates for their time in the interview process if they should make it to this final stage of the project, how can we compensate them for their time? Now, the work that they're doing is largely to showcase what their thoughts are, and to showcase their skills. So it's not work that we can actually turn around and use, but we do feel that we are in a partnership in the hiring process, and that we're both interviewing each other other. And if they're going to take a few hours to deep dive into a data people topic, we would love to pay them for it. So this is something that I think more and more teams are starting to look at. Really proud that we do it here. And I think the mistake of potentially not doing this for teams that are considering it is that candidates, do express in our process that they love that we do this, and they do feel they do sometimes express that with other companies that don't compensate them, they can feel taken advantage of. They also don't always have the time. Of course, they're interviewing as many companies as we're probably interviewing candidates. And so it's a lot of time that they're dedicating to a project. And so we feel the right choice is that candidates are appreciated for their time and work. They have the ability to focus on our project, knowing that they're getting compensated for it. So this is something that we think a lot about. Brett, I would love to ask you about this as well. How do you think that fair compensation is determined for these interview projects?
It's a great question. I can actually talk about this from a very recent candidate experience of, I interviewed for data people, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. And I think for me, the experience, it was super helpful because I had to ask my wife to take time to watch the kids while I was doing work. And not everybody has that additional support network. And so, if I needed to, I could have paid a babysitter or a nanny or somebody else to free up that time so I could truly focus. For me, it was a huge delight. And so I think it gets to the core of this question of what fair compensation is. Fair compensation is something that is hard to determine. It is a little bit individual based on the candidate involved, the role that they're hiring for. And so it doesn't need to be the equivalent of your hourly rate, but it should be thoughtful of, you should think about and be intentional with how many hours you think it's going to take, and you should provide a requisite compensation equivalent for those hours. And so whether it's the average babysitter in downtown Los Angeles costs $30 an hour, and we're asking 5 hours, if not 10 hours of this candidate, there's a pretty simple math equation there that you could take. You could also look at how much they anticipate making on an hourly basis. But ultimately, and certainly for me, and I imagine for many people, it's probably less of the number than you think.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of the demonstration of what the number means. The number means that we appreciate and recognize that they did something that they didn't have to do.
Mm-hmm.
They did something that we asked them to do, and they spent a good amount of time doing it. And that's why this is really important to think about. And so I wouldn't anchor too much on the number. There's a math problem you can no doubt create to get to that number. It's more around demonstrating a clear appreciation for what the candidate is doing for you in service of your interview process.
I love that.
All right. So step 7, and this one speaks to the inner marketer in me as well, as harness recruiting analytics. A lot of hiring is done by feel versus by facts, and at times that's really hard because ATSs don't make data accessibility all that easy, because really instrumentation is sometimes lacking. It's not available out of the box with many tools. And so consequently, talent acquisition often feels like they don't have a choice. But the reality is, in many cases, you do. And whether you use a platform like Data People that augments the capabilities and makes the data in your ATS much more accessible, usable, and actionable, or whether it's just working with your talent ops team to make sure that the data that you're collecting is the data that is helping you make better decisions. Over time, we really should continue to insist on data. So I'd love to ask you, Jenna, about your experiences with that. Like, data is enormous in talent acquisition. We can capture any data field we really want to, but sometimes that enormity of the data pool makes it more challenging to understand and focus on and take action on the most important ones. So do you have a handful of favorites that you and your teams felt were most instrumental to success, not only with that candidate, but over time, delivery of a great candidate experience?
Absolutely. Again, I think this goes back to TA being a strategic partner. I think more and more data is becoming the differentiator. How can we talk about our outcomes? But even before we talk about our outcomes, which is something that I think that we're thinking a lot about already. But before we think about outcomes, how can we think about the process that's in motion? How can we use data to really power our work? And so putting my head of customer success hat back on with all of our data people customers, I think we're still talking a lot about some outcomes. So there's, of course, your time to hire. You always want to think about the, efficiency of your process. There's the diversity of your applicant pools. I think a lot when we talk to teams are thinking about the outcomes part of diversity, but you can be measuring much further up the process as well. Definitely the efficacy of the sources. So you're probably spending a lot in LinkedIn, on Indeed, all these platforms that we're certainly spending a lot of money to get those eyeballs on our jobs. But how efficient is that spend? These are questions that really sophisticated teams are starting to ask. And I think so that some of my favorite questions from customers that we get are, tell me about the diversity of my applicant pool when we're just looking at the applicant pool itself and who gets moved to the first phone screen. Tell me about my engineering team in EMEA. How are they doing compared to the engineering team in the US? There's lots of really great data that we can dive into, not only in a platform like Data People, but it's really in the ATS as well. There's a lot of really great data that I think TA teams can be honing in on. One of the things that I'm so excited about with Data People is our upcoming release of a rec-based report. So not only can you be looking at historical data, but you're going to look at data real time. I'm using this on a job that I'm currently hiring for right now on my team, and it's so impactful to see how many applicants are moving from one stage to the next. What's the diversity of that pool? What are the sources? So I think these are the kind of in-motion analytics that we'll all have at our fingertips to really power our work in real time. And I'm really excited about those.
I love that. I love that.
And so, I mean, I probably have been plugging Data People a bit too much, but I will say that if you're looking for a platform that does think about hiring and fairness and the efficiency of that process, we have a platform that will help serve that intelligent editor where you can create unbiased job posts and emails and communications to your candidates. You can think about the insights that you want to highlight, not only for your hiring managers, but for your leaders around the good work that the TA team is doing. And so we think a lot about these things in our work with our customers. And I think, Brett, you mentioned earlier that we're really helping, we're really helping companies in 80 countries. We're working with tens of thousands of TA professionals every day to really think about how their work with candidates is effective. And so we see that Data People really helps create that really powerful candidate experience. So from the very beginning, like I said, I started at the ATS. That's where mentally I started with the candidate experience. But as you can see, Data People bumps that out to really the job creation process, that intake process. How can you be creating that consistency, that unbiased process from the very beginning? How do you get through the ATS process with all that incredible work that you're doing with candidates? That's really when the candidate experience is shining, it's personalized. And then we're also helping measure and create insights for your team as you continue to forecast and think about how your historical data can be used to, again, power the work that your team is doing. So we're really thinking about the candidate experience from before there are even candidates to the end. And we are so proud of all of our incredible customers and the incredible feedback that they continue to give us. So we're very excited to work with companies of all sizes, from mid-market all the way up to enterprise, and really support the work that they're doing in their communities to really create incredible candidate experiences. So we would love to hear from you if you are interested in anything we spoke about today about data people.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jana. I loved all of your stories, from being a leader in talent acquisition to now being a champion for all the leaders in talent acquisition. So inspiring, so fun. And let's go deliver a great candidate experience together.
Thank you so much for your time, Brett. Great to be here.
Thank you.